The galaxy had been peaceful for centuries. The Galactic Council, made up of alien leaders from across the stars, ruled with an iron fist. The humans, once thought to be a small, insignificant species on a distant planet, had remained quiet, letting the Council carry on their way. But now, something was changing. In the quiet halls of Earth's government, a storm was brewing. Inside the vast, high-tech room where Earth's leaders met, the atmosphere was tense. The usual noise of discussions and debates was absent. The humans were silent, their faces grave, as they listened to the latest transmission from the Galactic Council. This was not just any message, it was a demand. The Galactic Council had invited humanity to peace talks, with the promise of giving Earth a seat at the table among the galactic powers. It sounded good on paper, but Earth's leaders knew better. There was no real intention of equality. The Council had already made up their minds. They saw humanity as a threat, a species too young, too unpredictable. And yet, they were offering peace, but under their own terms. As the transmission ended, Earth's leaders exchanged uneasy glances. The time had come to decide. Should they accept the Council's terms and continue the peaceful charade, or should they do something bold, something unexpected? General Lara Banks, a seasoned military strategist, stood up from her seat, her sharp eyes scanning the room. "We've been silent for too long," she said, her voice steady. "The Council doesn't understand us, and they never will. This is our chance to show them that we are not afraid." President Alan Green, a calm and collected leader, nodded slowly. "But if we refuse their terms, the consequences could be catastrophic. The Council is not known for their mercy. They might see our rejection as a declaration of war." "We've faced worse," Lara replied, "and we've survived. They think we are weak, but they have no idea what we've been preparing in the shadows." The room was filled with a heavy silence. The weight of their decision hung in the air. Earth had always been a peaceful planet, reluctant to enter the affairs of the galaxy, but times had changed. The Council's arrogance was too much to ignore. Humanity had grown stronger, wiser, and more determined. Lara's words echoed in everyone's mind. "We've faced worse, and we've survived." The human leaders had spent years, decades, silently preparing for this very moment. They had built fleets, developed new technologies, and created powerful alliances, all without the Council's knowledge. Earth had been pretending to be weak, hiding its strength, all while the Council believed they were dealing with a vulnerable species. The calmness of the moment was shattered when the President made his decision. "Prepare a response," he said, his voice firm. "We will not bow down to the Galactic Council. We will show them the strength of humanity. It's time for them to understand that we are not afraid." Outside the government building, the winds began to pick up. The skies darkened as if the Earth itself was preparing for what was to come. There was an eerie stillness, as if the planet was holding its breath, waiting for the inevitable clash. The response was simple but clear. Earth's leaders transmitted a single message to the Galactic Council. "We are no longer interested in peace talks. The time for negotiation is over." For the first time in years, there was a feeling of unity on Earth. People everywhere were watching the transmission, and they knew that something big was happening. The message had been sent, and it was a message the Council would never forget. Back in the Galactic Council's chambers, the alien leaders stared at the message in disbelief. How could this be? They had never expected this from Earth. The humans were supposed to be weak, submissive, and easily intimidated. Instead, they had rejected peace and turned their back on the Council's offer. One of the Council members, a tall, blue-skinned alien with multiple eyes, slammed his fist onto the table. "This is unacceptable. How dare they defy us?" The Council leader, an ancient being known for his wisdom and power, sat quietly, his mind working furiously. He had anticipated some resistance, but this level of defiance was unexpected. He had assumed that humans would fall in line, just as the other species had done. But this was different. "This changes everything," the leader murmured. We cannot allow this to go unpunished. They must be reminded of their place. But even as the council planned their next move, they couldn't help but feel a twinge of fear. For the first time, they weren't dealing with a helpless species. They were facing something new, something they hadn't expected. A species that wasn't afraid to stand up to them. On Earth, the leaders gathered once more. The decision had been made. There would be no turning back. They had sent a clear message, and now they would prepare for whatever came next. The storm had begun, and the Galactic Council would soon learn that humanity was not a species to be underestimated. The moment the message was transmitted, Earth's leaders sat back, silently watching the screens. The decision had been made. There was no going back now. The room was heavy with the weight of their choice, yet there was no fear, only a grim determination. Humanity had sent its message to the Galactic Council. We are no longer interested in peace talks. The calm before the storm was now over. Now, the storm was coming. The Galactic Council had never encountered a species like humanity. For centuries, they had been able to control every species they came into contact with, either through diplomacy or sheer force. Earth, in their eyes, had always been a primitive, undeveloped world, full of conflict and chaos. But they had underestimated one thing: the strength of the human spirit. Back in the heart of the Galactic Council, chaos erupted. The blue-skinned alien, with his multiple eyes, was the first to react. He stood up, his body rigid with anger, and slammed his fists onto the polished table. His voice rang out, sharp and dangerous. "This is an insult. How dare they reject our offer? They are nothing. We should crush them immediately." His outburst sent ripples of shock through the council. The other members exchanged nervous glances. Most of them had expected some form of resistance, but not this. Not outright defiance. The humans had always been considered insignificant, but now they had openly rejected the Galactic Council's terms, and that was something they had not prepared for. The council leader, a figure of ancient age and wisdom, slowly raised his hand, silencing the room. His presence alone was enough to bring the chamber to a hush. His face was calm, but his mind was racing. This was no ordinary rebellion. This was something different. Humanity had shown not just courage, but an undeniable strength, a resolve to fight back against the might of the galaxy's most powerful coalition. "Calm yourselves," the leader's voice echoed throughout the chamber. "We cannot act in haste. This is not a mere rejection. There is something more to this. They are not as weak as we thought." His words did little to settle the nerves of the others, but they knew better than to argue. The council leader had seen countless civilizations rise and fall. He knew that a species willing to reject peace talks outright was not one to be taken lightly. Meanwhile, on Earth, General Lara Banks and President Alan Green stood at the front of the war room, their faces illuminated by the glow of various monitors. Outside, the first signs of the storm began to show. The atmosphere was charged, as if the very air was crackling with energy. "We've done it," President Green said, his voice steady. But his eyes, though calm, betrayed a flicker of concern. "But now we wait. They won't just let this go." General Banks nodded. "They'll come for us. But we're ready. We've spent years preparing for this day, quietly building our forces, developing technologies they have no idea exist. They thought we were weak. Now they'll find out just how wrong they were." It had been a long time coming, this moment. Earth had been silent for too long, playing the role of a passive observer in the vast galaxy. But now, they had stepped into the spotlight, and they had sent a message loud and clear. Humanity was no longer a passive species. They were a force to be reckoned with. The calm before the storm had ended. The storm was here, and the Galactic Council had just begun to realize the full extent of their mistake. Back on the Council's homeworld, the leader of the Galactic Council stared at the transmission from Earth. It was simple, clear, and it cut through the air like a blade. "We are no longer interested in peace talks," it had said. "No threats, no violence, just cold, hard refusal. It had shaken the council to its core. The leader's mind was working furiously, running through every possible response. What if we show them who's in charge? The blue-skinned alien suggested, his voice dripping with malice. We send our fleets to Earth, crush their cities, teach them their place. No, the council leader said firmly, his eyes narrowing. We cannot act impulsively. We need to understand what we're dealing with first. If they are truly as strong as they seem, we cannot risk an open conflict without knowing more. Prepare a full intelligence report. I want to know everything about humanity's military capabilities. We need to know what we're facing before we make any move. On Earth, the leaders knew that the next phase had already begun. The Galactic Council would retaliate, and they would do so with everything they had. But the humans were not afraid. They had been preparing for this moment, and now they would fight back. The Council had overestimated their power, and humanity was about to show them what it meant to be underestimated. The storm had only just begun, and neither side knew how it would end. But one thing was certain, there would be no turning back now. The Galactic Council, once a symbol of unyielding power across the stars, now found itself shaken to its very core. In the deep, cold reaches of space, far from the sight of Earth, the Council's decision-making chamber hummed with tense deliberations. The most powerful species in the galaxy had just been given a rude awakening. Humanity, the planet they had considered a backwater, had rejected them with a cold, calculating finality. But the Council was not about to let this affront stand. We cannot allow this to go unpunished, the blue-skinned alien snarled. His words filled the chamber, reverberating in the ears of those gathered around the table. He slammed his fist against the table, his multiple eyes blazing with fury. Humanity has humiliated us. We must act now. The Council leader, an ancient being whose wrinkles were deep enough to reflect the age of galaxies, took a slow breath. He had seen empires rise and fall in his long life, but this was different. I know, he replied calmly, but we must be careful. A war with Earth may not be as simple as we think. The Council murmured in agreement, but not without skepticism. The leader had been right in the past. His wisdom was often the guiding force behind their decisions. Yet the impatience that boiled under the surface of each member was growing stronger with every passing second. Prepare the fleet, the leader finally ordered. We will send a message that humanity cannot ignore. We will show them why the Galactic Council is feared across the universe. A series of nods followed, though the tension was palpable. Despite the leader's calm demeanor, there was no mistaking the urgency that laced his voice. The Galactic Council knew that their authority was at risk. The rebellion of one planet could spark others, and that would be the end of their reign. Back on Earth, the leaders of the planet were preparing for a different kind of storm. General Lara Banks stood at the head of the war room, her eyes glued to the holographic map that displayed the movements of the Galactic Council's fleets. Her face was impassive, but inside, she knew the storm that was about to break would be unlike anything humanity had ever faced. How long until they reach us? President Alan Green asked, his voice steady but tinged with concern. Not long, General Banks replied. They've mobilized their forces. The galactic fleet is vast, and they're coming for us. But we've been preparing for this moment for years. Their arrogance and underestimation of us have played into our hands. She turned to the monitor, her fingers dancing across the controls as the map zoomed in on Earth's defenses. The human fleet, although far smaller than the Galactic Council's, was formidable. It had taken time, years of secrecy and building up forces, but now the moment had arrived. Humanity would stand its ground. We've learned a lot from their communications, General Banks continued. We know their tactics, their strengths, and their weaknesses. We may be outnumbered, but we will not be outsmarted. President Green nodded, his face grim. Then it's time. Let them see what happens when they push humanity too far. The galactic fleet sped through the darkness of space, their ships sleek and terrifying, capable of laying waste to entire civilizations. As they approached Earth, their commanders were eager to strike. They had underestimated humanity's resolve, but they had no choice now but to make an example of them. The fleet's advanced sensors locked onto Earth's defenses, and the first wave of warships moved into position. The air around the planet crackled with the power of the impending battle. The Galactic Council believed it could overwhelm the humans with sheer might. After all, Earth was a relatively young world in the grand scheme of the galaxy. They had no idea how wrong they were. On Earth, a different kind of energy was in the air. People had long been told that humanity's greatest strength was in its unity. The Galactic Council had tested that theory, but now, humans would test something else: their ingenuity and their refusal to bend in the face of adversity. General Banks stood tall before her team, her face calm and determined. "This is the moment we've been waiting for. We fight not for survival, but for our right to choose our own fate." With a single command, the human fleet rose from Earth's atmosphere, their ships positioned like a shield between the planet and the encroaching galactic armada. The air was thick with the promise of conflict, but there was no fear in the eyes of those who had chosen to defend their home. There was only the burning desire to protect their world and send a message to the galaxy. Humanity would not be silenced. As the first shots were fired, echoing through the vastness of space, the conflict that had begun with a single message was about to ignite into a full-scale war. The first volley of fire echoed across space like a thunderclap, shaking the very foundation of both fleets. The darkness of space illuminated with bright flashes of energy as the two forces collided in an all-out battle. Earth's fleet, though smaller in number, fought with unparalleled precision and determination. The human ships, designed with the latest tech and enhanced by years of careful preparation, moved like shadows, each one a well-oiled machine of war. On the other side, the Galactic Council's ships responded with overwhelming firepower, their massive warships towering over the human vessels. Their weapons were advanced, their shields near impenetrable. They were the might of the galaxy, the power of ages, and they believed that no force could stand against them. But they underestimated humanity. General Lara Banks stood at the command center, her eyes fixed on the battle unfolding above Earth. Her expression was intense, focused, but there was no fear in her eyes. This was the moment she and countless others had prepared for. The war for humanity's freedom had begun. "Status report," she commanded, her voice calm but firm. "Sir, the enemy is pushing forward," one of her officers responded. "But we've managed to hold them at bay with our shield systems. They've underestimated the power of our countermeasures. Their energy shields are weaker than they thought. It's just a matter of time before we start breaking through." General Banks nodded, her lips curling into a tight smile. "Good. Make sure they don't get too close. We have to keep them at range." The human fleet, though smaller, was far more agile. Their ships darted around the massive Galactic Council warships, dodging beams of energy and retaliating with strikes of their own. Each attack, though small, had an impact, and the damage began to pile up. On the other side, the Galactic fleet was relentless. They fired their weapons with precision, sending waves of energy toward Earth's ships. But every time they thought they had the upper hand, the humans responded with ingenuity and resourcefulness. Their tactics were unpredictable, keeping the Galactic fleet on the defensive. In the midst of the chaos, President Alan Green watched from the Earth's command center, his face pale but resolute. The Galactic Council might have been the most powerful force in the galaxy, but they were now facing something they couldn't understand: humanity's unwillingness to back down. "We can't let up," he muttered to himself. "We have to hold the line, no matter the cost." Back in space, the human fleet was now fully engaged, and every single ship carried the weight of their world. Every soldier aboard those vessels knew they were fighting for their future, for their children, for their very existence. But the Galactic fleet was not going to fall easily. Their warships were equipped with technology beyond human understanding, and they wielded their firepower with ruthless efficiency. They were giants compared to the humans, immense in size, power, and experience. Yet, humanity's greatest strength wasn't its technology, it was its resolve. General Banks was well aware of the odds. They had been told that the Council's fleet was unbeatable, that Earth would fall before it could even mount a resistance. But now, as the battle raged above them, General Banks knew that humanity had more than enough to fight back. She stood before her team, watching the screens with unwavering focus. "Remember what we're fighting for," she said, her voice steady. "We fight not just for Earth, but for the future of every species out there. They want to control us, but they'll never control our will." In space, the battle intensified as both sides clashed in a frenzy of light and sound. Earth's fleet fought back with all they had, their weapons firing in quick succession. The Galactic Council retaliated with heavy artillery, sending beams of energy that could turn entire ships into dust. But still, humanity held on. Every inch of space was contested. Every battle was fiercely fought. The human fleet would not back down. Not now. Not ever. The Galactic Council began to realize that this battle was not going the way they had expected. Their confidence was shaken as Earth's ships continued to fight back with a ferocity that even they had not predicted. The Galactic Fleet's massive warships were beginning to show signs of damage, their once impenetrable shields cracking under the pressure. The tides of war were shifting. The Galactic Council had believed their technology would be enough to crush Earth's resistance. They had believed their power would make them invincible, but they were starting to learn a hard truth. Humanity had a power that no weapon could replicate, the power of defiance. As the battle raged on, both sides knew that the outcome was far from certain. But one thing was clear: this was no longer just a fight for Earth's survival. It was a fight for freedom, for choice, and for the right to exist on their own terms. The first wave of the Galactic Fleet had been met with fierce resistance, but this was only the beginning. The real test would come soon, and both sides were preparing for what would be the defining clash of the war. The battle above Earth raged with intense fury, each moment more crucial than the last. The Galactic Council, once confident in their overwhelming firepower, had begun to show signs of uncertainty. Their ships, once seemingly invulnerable, were now taking hits, their shields flickering under the constant barrage of human fire. General Lara Banks stood firm at the command center, her eyes locked on the vast expanse of space displayed before her. Every signal, every piece of data, and every pulse of energy from the battlefield told the same story. Humanity was holding its own, and more. "We've got them on the ropes," one of her officers said, his voice filled with a mix of disbelief and excitement. "Their ships are damaged. We've got them backing off." Lara didn't allow herself to feel any triumph yet. "Stay focused," she replied, her voice steady. "The battle's not won yet. We push them while they're vulnerable." The human fleet was far from perfect. They were smaller, less advanced in some areas, and still very much under-resourced compared to the massive warships of the Galactic Council. But they had something the Council did not: sheer determination. Every human on those ships knew what they were fighting for: home, family, freedom. It was a fierce, personal battle. Above Earth, the tide had begun to shift. The Galactic Council's flagship, a massive behemoth with towering shields and weapons capable of laying waste to entire planets, had taken several hits. The ship, though still formidable, was far from invincible. Its once glowing shields were now dull, flickering intermittently, as if struggling to hold on. The command center aboard the ship buzzed with activity, but the faces of its officers were etched with concern. "Admiral, we've lost contact with our right flank," a nervous officer reported. "The enemy's hitting us with more intensity than we anticipated. Their ships are faster, their weapons unexpected." Admiral Torek, the leader of the Galactic Council's fleet, stood rigid at the heart of the command center. He had always believed that their advanced technology would be enough to crush the human resistance. The humans were primitive, after all, still clinging to old technology and ideas. But now he saw something he hadn't anticipated. the unpredictability and ferocity of human resolve. This wasn't supposed to happen, Admiral Torek muttered under his breath, his gaze fixed on the chaotic battle unfolding outside the flagship's windows. We underestimated them. We've underestimated Earth. He clenched his fists. If they didn't act soon, this battle could be the beginning of something far worse for the Galactic Council. Meanwhile, on Earth, President Alan Green paced back and forth in the war room. The reports from the front were coming in fast and furious, each one showing a victory for humanity. But he knew better than to get comfortable. The Galactic fleet had not yet shown all of its strength, and with every second, the risk of an all-out retaliation grew. They're starting to back down, Alan said to his top advisors. But this isn't over. We've only gained the upper hand for now. We have to keep the pressure on them. If we give them time to regroup, they'll retaliate. We're holding them off, sir, one of his generals replied. But they're not a force that breaks easily. If they rally, they could turn this fight around in an instant. Alan nodded. That's why we need to strike now. We need to force them to retreat. Not just for now, but for good. We've already sent them a message. They won't forget it. But deep down, Alan knew that this was just the beginning. The Galactic Council had already seen what Earth could do. The first phase of the battle had shown them that humanity wasn't going to roll over, that their resolve was unbreakable. The stakes were higher now. Back in space, the human fleet didn't stop pushing forward. General Banks was relentless, giving orders with an unshakable confidence. The galactic ships that had once seemed unstoppable were now struggling. Earth's ships, though fewer, were using their speed and unpredictability to outmaneuver their much larger counterparts, hitting key targets and weakening the Council's fleet. Keep the pressure on, General Banks barked. Take out their engines. Disable their command ships. We've already shown them our strength. Now we finish what we started. And finish they would. Every human ship moved with purpose, each one striking like a precise blow, taking down vital systems on the galactic warships. The galactic fleet's numbers were falling, their once impressive ships being disabled one by one. But the Council wasn't finished yet. They still had a powerful weapon in reserve, one that could tip the scales back in their favor, and they were preparing to use it. Admiral Torak had no choice. The retreat had failed. It was time for the last option. Prepare the weapon, he ordered. We can't afford to lose here. If we must, we'll destroy everything. We'll make Earth's victory a hollow one. On Earth, the news of the turning tide had begun to spread. People across the planet watched as their fleet fought back against the most powerful force the galaxy had ever known. But they were unaware that the Galactic Council had one final weapon left. A weapon so devastating that it could destroy everything, if the Council chose to unleash it. The suspense now hung thick in the air. Humanity had taken the fight to the Galactic Council, and victory was within their grasp. But as the Council prepared their final weapon, one question remained. Could Earth withstand what was coming next? The battle in space raged on with brutal intensity. The human fleet, driven by determination and an unyielding will to protect their home, had turned the tide. The once overwhelming might of the Galactic Council's forces was faltering. Their massive ships, which had seemed impenetrable at the start, were now vulnerable. Humanity had shown them that they could fight back and win. But the Galactic Council was not one to admit defeat. Deep within the heart of their command flagship, Admiral Torek stood resolute, though the weight of the situation bore heavily upon him. His fleet was faltering, their numbers dwindling, but he wasn't ready to give up yet. He had one last card to play, a weapon that, if unleashed, could end everything. Activate the final weapon, Torek commanded, his voice cold and unwavering. We can't afford to lose this battle. We will crush them, no matter the cost. The officers around him exchanged uncertain glances, but they knew better than to question his orders. The final weapon had been kept secret for years, hidden in the depths of the Council's most advanced research. It was designed for one purpose only: to end a war decisively, regardless of the consequences. On the massive flagship, technicians scrambled to engage the weapon. Energy began to build in the ship's core, a deadly force that, if released, could obliterate entire fleets, and possibly entire planets. Meanwhile, back on Earth, General Lara Banks and her crew were unaware of the imminent danger. Their success in the battle so far had instilled a sense of hope, but Lara's instinct told her that the Galactic Council wouldn't back down easily. The Council had always been ruthless, and despite their setbacks, they were still dangerous. "General," one of her officers said, his voice tense, "the Galactic fleet is pulling back. They're retreating to their flagship. But something's off. Their energy readings are spiking. It's like they're powering up something massive." Lara's heart skipped a beat. She had seen this before, when a fleet was backed into a corner and had no other option but to pull out the most dangerous weapon they had. She didn't need to ask any more questions. "Prepare for anything," she ordered, her voice calm but laced with urgency. "We don't know what they've got left, but we can't take chances." The human fleet remained focused, though a sense of unease rippled through the ranks. They had fought so hard, but the fear of the unknown loomed large. Was the Galactic Council preparing to launch their most devastating weapon? On the Galactic flagship, the final weapon began to take shape. A massive, concentrated beam of energy was forming within the ship's core. The weapon was still unstable, but the calculations had been made. It was their last resort, the weapon that could obliterate all that stood before them. Admiral Torak watched the progress with a mixture of pride and desperation. "This will be the end of the human threat," he muttered to himself, barely able to believe that it had come to this. "We will not be beaten by these primitive beings." The weapon charge, the deadly energy swirling in the core of the flagship, ready to be unleashed. Meanwhile, Earth's fleet was still advancing, their confidence building as the battle seemed to shift in their favor. General Banks was overseeing the final push, determined to break the Galactic fleet for good. But then, it happened. The first tremors of the weapon's discharge rippled through space. A blinding flash of light erupted from the flagship, followed by an earth-shaking roar. The energy beam shot forth, tearing through space with terrifying speed. "Brace for impact," Lara shouted, her voice commanding as the entire fleet braced for the impact of the Galactic Council's final gambit. The beam was aimed directly at Earth's fleet. For a split second, time seemed to stand still as the beam closed in, a harbinger of destruction. The human fleet could do nothing but watch as it approached. The weapon was far more powerful than anything they had encountered before, its destructive force capable of turning the tide in an instant. Lara's mind raced. She could almost feel the heat of the beam's power as it bore down on them. And yet, she wasn't ready to surrender. Humanity hadn't come this far just to give up now. She barked orders to her fleet, urging them to scatter and reposition. They were going to make this as hard as possible for the Council. The beam tore through the void, drawing closer with each passing second. Earth's fleet moved with unyielding precision, trying to evade the deadly energy weapon. Ships twisted and turned, dodging the path of destruction as best they could. But it was too late. The beam struck. A massive explosion rocked space as the beam collided with the outer edges of Earth's fleet, decimating several ships in an instant. The energy surged through the area, sending shockwaves that disrupted the movements of the remaining fleet. The flagship's weapon had done its job, but the cost had been immense. The damage had been catastrophic, but it hadn't destroyed humanity's will to fight. And that's when it happened. In the aftermath of the explosion, as the smoke and debris cleared, something strange began to unfold. The Galactic fleet, though damaged, was not celebrating its victory. Instead, it was clear that their final weapon had not accomplished what they had hoped. Earth's fleet was battered, but they were not finished. They had survived the most devastating attack the Council could muster. "General," one of the officers reported, "the Galactic fleet is retreating. They've taken heavy losses, and they're pulling back to regroup." Lara's eyes narrowed as she watched the galactic ships pull away, a sense of disbelief washing over her. The Galactic Council, despite everything they had thrown at humanity, was retreating. The battle was not over, but humanity had survived. And that was all that mattered. As the dust of battle settled in the cold void of space, an eerie silence gripped the battlefield. The last remnants of the Galactic Council's fleet drifted back into the shadows, wounded but still formidable. However, their retreat didn't bring relief. It only intensified the tension. General Lara Banks stood at the bridge of Earth's flagship, her gaze locked on the fleet's trajectory. Her fleet was battered, but alive. The mission was not yet over, and the stakes had never been higher. The Galactic Council had just launched their final devastating weapon and failed to crush humanity's resolve. But the war was far from finished. "Status report," she ordered, her voice calm, though a storm of thoughts swirled in her mind. "General, we've taken heavy losses, but the fleet is still operational. Some ships are disabled, but we've managed to hold our ground," came the reply from her second-in-command, Captain Wren. His face was grim, but there was a glimmer of hope in his eyes. "The Council's weapon was powerful, but it didn't break us." Lara nodded, but she knew this was not the time to celebrate. "Prepare to send a message. I want the Galactic Council to hear this loud and clear. Humanity is not done. Not by a long shot." She turned to her communication officer, a young lieutenant who had been at the heart of every battle so far. "Broadcast to the entire galaxy. Let them know that this fight isn't over, and humanity isn't going anywhere." The officer tapped a few controls, and Lara's voice echoed through the vastness of space, reaching the ears of every alien leader in the galaxy. Her words were direct, without hesitation. "To the Galactic Council, you made a grave mistake when you underestimated humanity. We are not the weak, helpless species you thought we were. We have fought, we have bled, and we have survived. This war is not over, and we will not rest until we see you held accountable for your actions." The silence that followed was deafening. The galaxy waited, hanging on the edge of uncertainty. Back on the flagship of the Galactic Council, Admiral Torak stood in stunned silence. He had watched as his fleet faltered, his greatest weapon failing to achieve its intended goal. He had believed the weapon would break humanity, but it had only fueled their resolve. "Activate the secondary protocol," Torak ordered with a cold, calculating tone. "If the humans refuse to surrender, we must consider our next course of action. The war is not yet decided." But his voice lacked conviction. The once imposing Galactic Council, who had ruled with an iron fist, now found themselves trapped in the web of their own making. Their power was slipping, and the idea of continuing the war with humanity seemed more and more like a futile endeavor. Meanwhile, General Banks and her fleet knew they were at a crossroads. The Galactic Council was still dangerous, but their desperation was a sign of weakness. Humanity had taken a stand, and the galaxy had witnessed it. The question remained, would the Council retreat entirely, or would they launch one final, all-out assault? Lara gathered her senior officers in the briefing room. They were battle-worn, tired, but the fire of determination burned brightly in their eyes. There was no turning back now. "We've proven to the galaxy that humanity will not bow down. We will fight with everything we have," she said, her voice steady. "But we must also be prepared for what comes next. The Council won't stop. They'll try to regroup, refuel, and rebuild their forces. Our job is to keep pushing forward." She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. "We're no longer just defending Earth. We're defending the future of every species that stands with us. This is bigger than any one battle. This is about the fate of the galaxy." Her words had an electrifying effect. The officers around the table nodded, their resolve hardening. There was no more uncertainty. The lines had been drawn, and the fight was on. As the fleet prepared for their next move, Lara's mind returned to the message she had sent to the Galactic Council. The battle was far from over, But humanity had proven that they would not be cowed by the might of the Council's forces. They had fought with grit, ingenuity, and an unbreakable spirit. The Council had learned it the hard way. But there was one final piece to the puzzle. If they're not willing to negotiate, we take the fight to them, Lara said, turning to her officers. We find their weakness and strike. We show them what humanity is capable of. The stakes were higher than ever. The future of the galaxy was in the balance, and the road ahead would be fraught with danger. But humanity had proven its strength, and now it was time to finish what they had started. The war was far from over, but the Council knew one thing for certain: humanity would not be silenced. In the depths of space, amid the wreckage of war, a new chapter in the story of humanity was just beginning. The Galactic Council may have been powerful, but they had underestimated humanity's greatest weapon, an unyielding will to survive. And that, more than anything, would be their undoing.